existing housing, people that own their homes. We're going to keep them wealthy. We're going to keep those prices up. We're not going to destroy the value of their homes so that somebody that didn't work very hard can buy a home. We're going to make it easier to buy. We're going to get interest rates down. But I want to protect the people that for the first time in their lives feel good about themselves. They feel like that they're wealthy people. And I want them to understand it. There's so much talk about, we're going to drive housing prices down. I don't want to drive housing prices down. I want to drive housing prices up.
Driving housing prices up kind of flies in the face of housing affordability. And we are still in the middle of a housing crisis. Americans can't afford to buy homes. A lot of Americans can't even afford what rent costs these days. But nonetheless, President Donald Trump initially had signed an executive order to drive institutional investors like private equity firms, for instance, out of the housing market to make housing more affordable, right? But as you saw in that video, he later stated that he actually wanted to drive housing prices up. So now Congress is stonewalling any attempt to codify Trump's original executive order where he wanted to ban private equity firms from buying residential real estate. Why? Well, because their donors are telling them to. So why don't we get into it? So here's what the Wall Street Journal just reported. They say that lawmakers in both chambers have resisted adding the investor ban, which traditional free market advocates, Wall Street executives, and the home builder industry generally oppose. These are individuals who make nice donations to political candidates. And so codifying a ban on institutional investors, not going to bode well for the lawmakers who vote yes on said legislation. So to be clear, the ban that is envisioned by President Trump would only apply to single family homes, okay? And look, when we're in the middle of a housing shortage, I am open to legislation that, certainly bans foreign investors, bans institutional investors from buying whatever stock or inventory of housing we have. That housing should, go to working class Americans until we buy, or I should say build enough housing to maybe lift some of those restrictions, but that's not what's happening here. So in fairness, there are certain Republicans who do support Trump's original executive order to ban these institutional investors from buying residential real estate. The only problem is you can count them on one hand and you still have some fingers left. Okay, so you've got Senator Josh Hawley, who's really kind of positioned himself as a more populist Republican. Then you've got Senator Josh Moreno and Representative Marlin Stutzman. Now, apparently, these politicians are better at reading the tea leaves than the rest of their Republican colleagues. And a recent survey by Groundwork Collaborative and Data for Progress found the following, that nearly 2/3 of Americans believe the way to lower housing costs is through regulating corporate landlords and institutional investors, which kind of depresses me, to be honest with you. Look, I'm not in favor of the private equity firms buying up residential real estate. I've railed against it. I've spoken out against it. I'm not changing my mind on it. But it's really important to understand that the main reason that is driving up housing prices is the lack of housing being available, okay? We need to build more. And by building more, that is gonna drive down the cost of homes. And I get it if you're a homeowner and you're bothered by that, but I promise you it's gonna be temporary. You've already built an insane amount of equity on your property, okay? And I'd like to take our fellow Americans off the streets. I'd like them to be able to build wealth. I would like them to be able to own a home and raise their kids and their family in said home. I want this country to thrive. Like, you have to think outside of your own personal interests sometimes. But if you only care about what's best for you, and it's okay if you prioritize that, understand that it's not really a good look to live in a society where you have all these people suffering on our streets. It's not a good thing. And we shouldn't want that. So a temporary dip in the value of your home because we've added more supply to the housing market is not a bad thing. You're gonna be okay. But nonetheless, it seems like Trump does seem to find that to be a bad thing. I don't really know how he intends to make housing more affordable without making housing more affordable. Like, how is this going to work? Anyway, but there's more. So both the House and the Senate are working on housing affordability bills that would cut down on red tape. I'm assuming that red tape has more to do with construction and less to do with easing up restrictions on mortgages. Like, I definitely don't want to find ourselves in the type of situation we were in prior to the 2008 economic collapse, where, these subprime mortgages and these like toxic loans were being given out to people who didn't really know what they were getting themselves into. Then those loans were, bundled up into securities that were traded on the stock market. That was a disaster. That red tape that happened after the economic collapse, which honestly was very weak red tape, I think that should stay in place. But in terms of like zoning regulations, which is really up to local and state governments, I do think they need to ease up a little bit, especially if you're talking about a state like California. I know that, leftists get really upset about this, but guys, regardless of where you live in the country, you have to understand what you're experiencing might be very different from what people in another state are experiencing. And there is too much red tape here in California. So much so that the people who had their homes burnt down last year, okay, January of 2025, in the Pacific Palisades and Altadena, they have yet to build their homes because there's so much red tape. We need to build more. That is very, very important. The other thing that this bill would do is incentivize more housing near transportation hubs, which I also think is a good thing, and what they're allegedly trying to do here in LA. Now, as you saw in the cold open, the first video we showed you, Trump doesn't want to lower the housing prices, so he's resisted proposals that would boost supply. Disastrous. I mean, look at what happened in Austin. During the pandemic, a lot of people moved to Austin. They realized there was a lot more demand. They have looser zoning regulations there. So they just had this boom in housing construction and prices came down significantly. That's the way you get the prices down.
You know that moment right before you launch something new, that pit in your stomach? I remember when I started TYT, I thought to myself, what if no one watches? What if we run out of money tomorrow? It was scary. Still think about that every once in a while, but you push through, and having the right tools makes all the difference. Like when we launched Shop TYT, Shopify was a lifesaver. We used it and we loved it. If you're starting a business, those what ifs can be terrifying, and that's where Shopify comes in. What if I can't build a good looking website? Shopify has hundreds of templates to build a beautiful online store that actually matches your brand. What if people haven't heard of my brand? Shopify helps you to get the word out with easy to run email and social campaigns. What if I get stuck or have a question in the process? Their award-winning 24/7 support is there with expert advice. And the best part, that iconic purple Shop Pay button. It's why Shopify has the best converting checkout on the planet. Less abandoned carts, more sales for you. It's time to turn those what ifs into with Shopify today. Sign up for your $1 per month trial today at shopify.com/TYT. Go to shopify.com/TYT. That's shopify.com/TYT.
But Trump is telling Congress to include the institutional investor ban in their housing bills rather than focusing on increasing housing supply. And Congress has thus far refused to do so. So let's take a look at this graph provided by Open Secrets, and it represents the amount of money the real estate industry has spent on lobbying in millions of dollars, okay? So you can see that they set a new high in 2024 after they spent over $150 million on lobbying. So when it comes to these institutional investors, there is a lot of moneyed interest playing a role in discouraging legislation that restricts institutional investors from buying up these homes. Now, during the 2023-2024 campaign cycle, the industry contributed about $72 million to Democrats in Congress and about $82 million to Republicans in Congress. Honestly, there isn't much of a gap there, close to similar amounts of money, okay? That's why I say we have a uniparty when it comes to issues that matter, right? The economy, foreign policy, stuff like that. lot of agreement between congressional Dems and Republicans. Now, is there any relief in sight? Well, a different proposal might stand a chance, and that's according to Bloomberg. They report that home building companies have pitched an idea to the White House. It's something that they are, I guess, referring to as Trump homes. We all know that you've got to slap Trump's name onto something in order for him to be like seduced by it. But the proposal calls for builders to sell entry-level homes into a pathway to ownership program funded by private investors. I'm against it already. Like, I think this is fishy. I don't trust it. It sounds like a scam. I'm gonna need to see a lot more detail, and there really isn't a lot of detail about this. This whole thing about like, yeah, you're gonna rent the property, and then at some point maybe we'll let you buy it. Yeah, that's the ticket. I don't know. It's giving me these like reverse mortgage for the elderly people vibe. Okay, so I'd have to wait and see what this type of proposal actually looks like on a granular level. But how about we just build entry-level housing? Like, how about we do that? You know, that happened in the 50s. The tract homes. Like, I grew up in a neighborhood like that. The homes, like they did mass construction of these tract homes. That's when suburban America really boomed. And we haven't had a housing boom like that in a long time. I think it's time. I think that's what we need to do. No gimmicks, no tricks, no rent to buy, no reverse mortgages, no BS. Just build the housing. But here's the thing, that needs to be done on a state and local level. So when it comes to the federal government, they might be able to help when it comes to maybe some federal funding to states that want to focus on increasing housing supply. But that's going to be difficult to do when Trump clearly doesn't want the value of homes to drop. He doesn't want to increase the housing supply. He wants the values to keep going up, probably because he's worried about his own portfolio. Let's keep it real. But that's not how you work toward affordable housing. You have to build more, and you have to accept the fact that values are going to go down temporarily. They'll shoot back up eventually. But anyway, that's what we have for you. That's the update. When Trump promises you cookies, don't go reaching for the milk, okay? Because he rarely keeps his promises.
Every time you ring the bell below, an angel gets his wings. Totally not true, but it does keep you updated on our live shows.